So my background, I'm kind of all over the place. I've been in information security, started when I went to the Air Force Academy. I was supposed to do space operations, got recruited into doing cyber defense and security operations center stuff, went into doing intrusion detection and national level computer intrusion investigations. But shortly after I left the Air Force, my career kind of took a really weird turn. And it kind of had this weird divergent thing. And this is where Steve says, I don't really talk about it much, but I'll give you guys a little bit of a hint. And I'll talk a little bit more than I usually do about it in here, just to give everyone on the offensive side a little bit more background than I normally do. So on the public persona side, because I worked in the national level intrusion investigation side, that's kind of the public facing thing that I did for SANS. I started doing forensics. I started doing Forensics 508, the Track 8, led the digital forensics investigations curriculum lead stuff. And that was kind of nice because that was what I did in my public persona job. In my other job that I did in my day job, I was a government contractor working for a company, Aegis Research Corporation, that later became Mantech. And I worked for Title 10, Title 50 organizations that basically supported direct trigger pulling operators in the field that did nefarious, fun, good guy stuff for offensive operations. What I personally did is I led a team of developers and exploit vulnerability researchers that helped find zero-day non-public exploits for about 3 years. And I have two non-public exploits that I can't say which ones they were, but I have two non-pubs to my name that I was able to find, universal non-pubs that I'm pretty proud of during that time that I was able to find. So I have that kind of background. And part of that background also spilled right over into the forensic side, which was when we were testing tools, when we were testing things that offensive operations were going to use, I would immediately be able to use my forensics background and say, well, this is how they're going to catch you. This is what they're going to be able to look for. But some of the things that also spilled over into this was, once you have penetration testing, once you have offensive operations that were occurring here, you also ran into this other equation that a lot of offensive operations individuals, especially in Title 10, Title 50, like nation state attackers, really started to get themselves wrapped up in, which is, you get into a large scale enterprise environment and you're faced with, okay, we gained credential access. And again, this is like, what is offensive forensics and why are we calling it this way? So let's talk about some of the assumptions first. It's post-compromise, credentials gained, and you have fundamental control of the network at this point. So hey, great, now what? And this is the big now what scenario that we all want to talk about. You have access to this network. You can do anything you want on this network. And now what? What is your operational goal? What is the nation state attacker there to do? What are they going to be looking for? Now, if you put the scenario into your head, you have thousands of nodes. It could be across multiple different geographic locations connected by VPNs. You have even a simple exchange server with thousands of users on it, with thousands of emails. Just curious, how many people have ever accomplished e-discovery, looking for a single email inside an organizational exchange environment? Anyone just like looking for a keyword, one email on a single exchange server, one person, one email, and you have all of the forensics tools at your capacity to go sit on a server to say, I need to find from person A to person B an email with a keyword on it. Awesome. Easy when you have all the tools available to you to do so. How do you do that if you're supposed to be remaining incognito mode? You're attached to an exchange server. You're supposed to be looking for the key emails, tied to the secret plans to the Death Star or something like that inside the organization. It goes back to why are you there in the first place? It's not just to gain access to the network and say, hey, we now have 100% control of this network. There's an operational component as to what your actual mission is. This is just day one. You just gained access. Great. Now what? And this is where offensive forensics comes into play. is the forensics component is taking the idea of all of these forensics capability that we typically have in front of you, and now you need to apply forensics principles on a remote network, looking for the needle in the haystack, but through an itty bitty straw, and hopefully no one will notice that you're searching for things. That's the key thing here. When Dave was talking about earlier in his previous talk about threat hunting, it's not about remaining stealthy. Anyone can remain stealthy as long as you stay not moving. You don't move, no one will see you. It's just, when I teach class in 508, one of the things that I always use as an analogy is when you take a look at someone who's in camouflage. It's, anyone dresses in camouflage. It works really well. You depending on how far away they are, if they're standing solidly still in the woods, it's probably hard to differentiate between the individual and the trees. But if they're moving, if there's some sort of rustling going on, if there's momentum, you're going to be able to see them. That's where the key thing here changes, is that in order for you to obtain your operational goals, how are you going to remain stealthy? So there's no way you're going to say, hey, okay, the game is, my operational goal is to remain stealthy. We'll come back to that here in a little bit, is why are you there? And that's the thing that a lot of people on offensive side always forget, is like, why are we there in the first place? It's, for a lot of pen testers, is to prove we gained access, to prove we were able to get in there, to be able to prove that we have gained control of the network. But for threat emulation, if you're going to move into threat emulation from adversaries, the threats need to then also achieve mission objectives, which is to go steal something, to potentially lay something into the network, to cause disruption, to commit espionage, to X, Y, and Z. What is the mission objective? And you could potentially, this is where the different adversary threats, the different advanced persistent threats, nation state attackers, criminal gangs that you potentially take a look at, from financial all the way down to espionage. What are their objectives, and what are you potentially trying to achieve, and what you're trying to look at when you're potentially trying to emulate what they're after? This is the now what. So when we go into this, the questions are, what is it that you're looking for? If you are the offensive operator at this point, what is it that you're looking for? Why are you there? I guarantee someone has set you up on a mission. If you're sitting there as a nation state attacker, someone is like, you breaking this network. Awesome, we're in, boss. I gained credential access. I am in there, we're in Uber, whatever that potential thing is at this point from the previous examples. Now what? What is it that we're in there for? What is it? How can we find it? And how do we exfil it without being seen? And this goes back to Dave's talk. All of those its end up being why threat hunting ends up being so darn important in your organization. It may be more difficult to detect the credential access and the initial penetration. It is much easier to potentially tune your sensors to look for the TTPs surrounding the its that are out there. Because in many cases, especially for those in espionage and trying to collect data and the searching that goes on, it is much more noisy. And we'll go through a couple scenarios here that will potentially lay this out in front of you and say, okay, which one are you going to be potentially more concerned about? How do you stay hidden? How do you achieve your mission objectives? And how do you finally maintain long-term access while you're trying to achieve the its that you're after? And this is, again, from a mindset, an operational control mindset, is how do you do this? And we'll go through some very technical examples here, as we go through this, because one of the questions a lot of people have in offensive world is, how good is anti-forensics? So question for you out there, as a trivia question here, before we move forward. How many people, just a show of hands, feel anti-forensics is really decent? That you could achieve a certain amount of stealth with a amount of, and I know you're kind of setting you up. You're like, I'm a forensics person. You're like, I'm afraid to answer that question. How many people, before we started this talk right now, that given your level of knowledge, that anti-forensics tools work pretty decently and provide amount of stealth necessary to achieve the mission? All right, thank you. Okay, just one person, that's it? No one else is gonna raise your hand. All right, you all chickens. No one else. Dave, even you? He's like, hell no. A lot of reasons why is like a lot of cases, anti-forensics is not even necessary in most environments. You just hide in plain sight. And that's like anti-forensics 101. You just make yourself look like everyone else in here. Like, I mean, anyone could probably come into this room without a badge, just wearing what color outfit. I mean, look around the room in here. Black, right? Wear something black. Okay, what else? Would you be able to like fit in pretty easily around here? Black with what? What kind of outfit? Hoodie. I hate to say it, but a lot of people have the hoodies in here. It is kind of cold in here. T-shirts. Yeah, by the way, Sans told me I could not wear my 9 Inch Nails t-shirt up here, which I have. I went to their concert. I had to wear an official, like Sans looking, garb just in case I was told, no, you had to look somewhat official. So I have a t-shirt under here, 9 Inch Nails. But again, I was like, like, what would you actually do? T-shirts, wear black. We have predominantly male, that's in the room in here. You would be able to walk in the room and fit in, knowing just a little bit about what does normal look like. And that's pretty much what most anti-forensics are able to do in here. So when we talk about anti-forensics, how good is the anti-forensics capabilities that are out there? Is it possible for operations to be completely fully in memory only? This is also, I get in a lot of debates with offensive operations. Like I could do a lot in memory, like I get in the system, I'm hanging out in some sort of shell code, doing a lot in memory with upload, download, Cobalt Strike. I do a lot in there. I'm not touching the system. Not to touch the file system at all. Like, okay, but now what? Now that you're there, cool. I will wait until you decide you actually have another goal to accomplish. Now remember, if someone is using these tools and techniques to actually complete some sort of mission objective, the goal is not just to be able to prove, hey, I just got in. Now that's penetration testing. That's what your contract says. Did I get in? Yes. If you're a nation state adversary, your goal is to actually accomplish a mission objective. You actually have to break out of the Cobalt Strike to say, okay, I need to do something else at this point. And this is where I'm going to touch the system at some point. Well, okay, I don't need to lay malware down. I can now live off the land. You use this technique all the time too. If I'm living off the land, I'm now interacting with the operating system. And by interacting with the operating system, I'm leaving these traces behind all over the place. Trace, everywhere that we could be potentially doing. But it only gets you so far because even those trace examples also leave those forensic footprints. And always depends on the true objective of what the offensive folks are taking a look at. So this comes from, I did a lot of research out there and I actually wrote a portion of 508. It was a section that we came out with about a year and a half ago, talking about all the different locations that you potentially see anti-forensics now being accomplished or could be accomplished from event log deletion tampering, process evasion, rootkits, code injection that you can potentially do, all the way down on the other end of the spectrum from file system. We all know about time stopping, file deletion, file free space wiping. And again, that's a big one. Data encryption, you have RAR files, fileless malware, not artifactless. It sounds weird to say that, but not artifactless. The registry, you could delete registry keys. But again, does it really become invisible? A lot of these different principles in here allow a certain amount of stealth. The hard part is, as the defenders, when you end up looking at this, is you have too many systems to potentially go in there and do a deep dive, lower level analysis on it. So your goal as part of the offensive team is to don't trigger something on a network that will create the defensive team to say, let me go take a closer look at that. Because if you do, then you'll have the eye of Sauron come in there and take a very close look at this stuff. And then this is where those indicators of compromise start coming from. This is where, aha, this team loves to wipe malware. Well, how would you, wait. How do they detect file wiping? That's not possible. I thought file wiping is completely innocuous as soon as we wipe the malware on the system. And we've seen multiple times multiple different nation state adversaries constantly would go and drop a piece of malware on the system, execute it, try to do something on that, and then trying to hide their malware from being able to be looked at, they will wipe it from the system. Great, we can't do a malware analysis against it, but we could see the malware once existed. And just by seeing it, what it was doing there and what it was named and how it was interacting with the system, there's a lot of perspective and indicators of compromise that we're able to potentially pull out of it, even if it's wiped off the system. And this is where, when we're taking a look at some of these things out there, why this comes into play. So let's talk about some offensive forensic examples of, we're going to layer this in with some anti-forensics as well as we're going through this. Nope, I went the wrong way. Okay, number one example, searching for the Death Star plans. So I use this example as a lot of attackers will typically go through an espionage style. I want to go find something and I want to grab it and I want to potentially exfil it. So in this situation here, the OP1 requirements are going to be, A, we need to maintain access, maintain a certain amount of stealth. We need to find the data without detection, and we need to exfil a large amount of data through an itty bitty straw. So on number 3 and number 4, this is where the problems come into play. Is anyone who has ever tried to find data across a network, this is not an easy task. Number one, it requires 2 things. You need a tool to find something, meaning that you have to have some sort of either PowerShell script or a finding capability or something that will go search through the Microsoft Exchange emails, look through files, look through the names of files. You have to have something do that. Has anyone ever noticed when you do a simple search on a single system, what happens to the processor? Pegs. All right, from a stealth perspective, what happens there? It goes way down. So you have this other issue here that as you're sitting there saying, genius idea, we could do a search. And anyone who's done forensics also knows anytime you're doing searching of anything, your processors go way up. And this is another way you could, from a threat hunting perspective, and also just from a, wow, that's kind of cool to go look at, is look at your systems across the network and watch your processor utilization over time. If all of a sudden you see a system on your network that suddenly starts spiking out of the blue, and it never spikes out of the blue and it's doing this across multiple nights, you should probably go look at that system. There's something going on there. I mean, just like processor utilizations. And a lot of the tools out there actually do trigger on these kind of things. But again, because they know that a lot of attackers out there are not able to potentially throttle their searching tools, you really have to potentially do a slow search for the artifact. It's like forensics at a turtle's pace. And for those of you who hate forensics already, because it's already a turtle pace for searching for a single email, trying to imagine trying to do it in an enterprise environment remotely through itty bitty straw that you might not have a lot of bandwidth to find things. And that's another reason why you got to find it. You need to pull it down to the smallest element and then figure out a way to encapsulate that, then exfil it back out of the network. How do they detect most intrusions these days? In many cases through that exfil, especially in data espionage. Like they see this massive amount of data heading out from the network that they haven't seen before. How do you do that trickle exfil? That's again, for anyone who's doing offensive work, one of the key ways to remain hidden is figuring out a way to do trickle exfil instead of like this massive dump that initially occurs. Now, sometimes you don't have a choice. You will just immediately say, boom, let's get it out of the network because we don't know how long the access is going to last. But if you're trying to maintain stealth, you have to figure out a way, just like it is in Ocean's 11, all the different sequels out there, is that you need to get the gold bars out of the casino one at a time without anyone noticing that all the gold is leaving right under their nose. This is a lengthy, slow, arduous process to maintain stealth in these environments. And this is, again, from a offensive perspective, where you go initially and have this eureka moment where you're like, "Ooh, we got in, we gained access, we have control of the network, yay us." Then you get into the actual offensive side of this and says, "Wow, now we actually have the hard part, which is how do we find it? How do we get it? How do we exfil it? And how do we remain hidden across all of these elements?" This is really difficult to do, and it requires some serious tradecraft and expertise to be able to do this. And not a lot of nation state adversaries have mastered this yet. And that's another way you could tell who you're dealing with is people who are really good at this and people who are like really clumsy at this. Because those who are clumsy at this are the ones that will trigger your threat hunting teams pretty easily, and they'll be patting themselves on the back. Wow, look how easy we were to find these attackers. It's the ones that you don't find that you should be really worried about. But that's not the only type of nation state attackers that are out there. Those who are just trying to do data exfil and data searching across your network. We'll go into the second example here in just a second. So this again goes into the movie analogy that I always like to talk about when you're talking about this stuff is, this is like submarine or spies. Just like every submarine movie that's out there. It's like, it's pretty amazing. You know, it's like you're under the water, everything is cool, no one can see you until you launch a torpedo or you pop up to the surface. Same exact thing. As soon as you make a move, you can be seen. And that's where the swarm of destroyers come in and start hunting you down. Same thing with spies. You're totally inert in the environment. No one knows you're a spy until you potentially have to make a move. And it's once you make that move, once you have to actually go active, once you actually have to steal the data and potentially do something, that's when you become noticeable. Maintaining stealth equals not moving. That's the camouflage principle. As long as you have to move into your objectives, that's when you become noticed. And that's where this yin and yang from an offensive perspective really has to come to a hold. And that's why this needs to be practiced before you decide to go into an offensive environment, decide to say, hey, let me go do this. Because if you sit there and think about this, you know, how you're doing this could potentially end up all that work that led you up to this point, gaining access, gaining credentials, getting in there in the first place, months and months and months of work and prep and everything could be destroyed by a single individual on the back end side who does it. Oops. How many people have had that moment? They're, oops. It's like, what? Wait, what? What did you just do? What did you just do? And you have that moment where you hear your friends like, oops. And you're like, what do you mean, oops? I don't think it's a big deal. You're like, well, we'll see if they notice, you know, that's where it's like that oops. And you hear it like, you know, there's that, you know, Emily in the back, I don't know if you could grab that. There's that wrench back there. You see that wrench? So the wrench, if you turn around and look at the wrench, this is the wrench that is always in the submarine. I don't know why they don't secure wrenches in the submarine. Everyone knows what I'm about to talk about. The wrench that somehow is on the desk when they're in silent mode and you hear the table bump and the wrench hits the floor. And everyone in the sub can hear it. And you hear, oops. And we're all waiting, looking up, waiting to see if the destroyer above heard that. And that's really what it comes down to in these environments once you get in there. So some anti-forensics examples of like how it is for you to be detected and when you're potentially moving around the network. This is one of these things when we talk about when we're teaching in our forensics classes, what adversaries end up seeing as a result of this. So number one, we gain authority. One of the things that we have to do at some point is get our malware, our persistent capability that's going to be in the network there at some point. So we have a credential harvesting, account creation. We have multiple different ways from getting our malware into the network. And then we potentially will need to execute the malware at some point. Now, whether that malware is something innocuous, whether it's something persistent, but you look at all these different ways, and Dave hit upon some of these even in his talk, just because there's only so many ways from get to point A to point B and have something go execute. You know, unless we're really at the T1000 where a piece of malware is sitting on a Windows system and the Windows system looks at it and says, hey, there's an executable here. I've never seen this thing before. Maybe I should run it. That has not happened ever. At this point, you still have to tell the remote system, hey, after I copied the exe or PowerShell script or anything to that remote system, I still need to tell that thing to execute. And that is going to launch the process or launch anything else that's going to gain that access on the remote system. And the only reason I mention this is again, despite the fact how stealthy you are, this is some of the different random normal TTPs that people are going to run through looking for your stuff across the network. And this is where threat hunting comes in. We teach it again and again and again. Very simple stuff. There's only so many different ways that you could execute a remote process. Yes, exec, Windows remote management tools, PowerShell remoting, WMIC, or the tried and true, but very rare, vulnerability exploitation. There's really only 4 ways you could say remote, execute, bang. And it's in one of those 4 different ways. And your threat hunting capabilities should be sitting on each one of these systems saying, hey, random code executed, flag it. Something I've never seen before. That's where those host-based detection capabilities should come into play here, really helping you out. How do you get the malware to the remote system? Again, should flag any executable or any PowerShell script or any script that's coming across the network that you've never seen before hit the remote system. Well, it's in memory. Is it? It's got to hit it somewhere. Got to hit the file system. Even the remote underneath executables that are tied to the PowerShell scripting or the WMIC commands also have that. And we, at SANS, we have this this blue poster that we talk about. If you go look at it, it actually shows all of the lateral movement techniques that are possible. And it basically shows you each one of these techniques, very scriptable and very threat hunting-esque that you would look for. And if you're a offensive operator looking at that and saying, yeah, if someone actually has tuned all of those things in their environment, my life would be really difficult. And this one slide here really does show you that in most cases, this really starts limiting your possibilities here without the last one there, which is, hey, I have a 0 day. And if I have a 0 day, I probably won't see it. Vulnerability exploitation, which is extremely rare. You want to limit that, but at the same time, you really can't prevent that one either. This is another example here. We talk about hiding in plain sight. Notice where this DLL host is sitting in or SVC host.exe, or tried and true, malware of named choice, sitting in wrong directory, DLL host. Where a lot of things sit here. One of the things that you'll see here that causes this to flag for us is in the forensics world, there's several different timestamps that are going to create flags of opportunity for us. Number one, there's a standard information creation time, which is what the normal file system flags. In NTFS, there's also another timestamp called the file name creation time. That is created a separate timestamp that's inside the NTFS timestamp, when we can actually do a comparison there and to compare it. The other thing that a lot of tools invariably do is when you timestamp something, it'll set all the nanoseconds to all zeros. So you end up seeing that as a potential flag. The compile times for a lot of the tools will potentially be off. And then there's another capability in there that is when an executable is shimmed, meaning that the operating system goes through and checks compatibility to see if it is executable within the operating system environment, and it is logged within the registry itself. It is shimmed at that time, and that shim cache mod time should match the modification time of this standard information creation time. All these timestamps should lock into place like a nice puzzle. When they don't, and they're out of order or they're mismatched, you have an anomaly. And when an anomaly occurs, you're staring at malware. This is again when I say, please use timestamping or these kind of capabilities in an environment, because it actually helps us find offensive action. This is a good example of like what we teach in our classes as to how easy it is to find even just simple timestamp detection. That's one of the reasons why the better thing to do is just don't touch it. If you're able to get it in there, lay it down on the system, and you're thinking someone might see it, they probably didn't, because you're just laying in everywhere, sitting across the file system in general. All right, operation 2. This is the one that causes me to lose sleep out of all the ones that are potentially out there. This one is what if you have someone who's not trying to steal stuff and they just want to penetrate a network and drop a piece of malware on the system, to lay in wait for some future havoc? This is I'm going to drop a piece of malware and maybe it'll beacon out, maybe I'll potentially remote execute it. This is going to be the destroy, disrupt, deny, degrade execution of do something bad against the system. Take it down, take down the network, take down the system, take down the environment, potentially. Why would someone want to do this? Well, nation state attackers obviously would potentially want to do this against any type of operation. They may want to potentially penetrate a network, say, hey, in the future, we may want to potentially pull trigger against said target and take it down at will in the future, but not right now. In this case, you can maintain stealth because once you get in and lay your malware down, it is just sitting there, and because you're not moving around, it becomes more camouflaged. This is where it does not require an extremely large footprint. And in many cases, it does not even require a very large runtime code footprint either. This is the type of stuff that causes me to lose more sleep. This is the type of stuff that threat hunting usually has a really hard time detecting. Is someone decides to say, hey, we are planning a large-scale catastrophic attack from Russia against this other thing over here. They've planned this for years, super stealthy. We'll lay a piece of malware down once a month at specific locations and just put it there and then never touch it again. And they'll have their malware sitting there and it's just an executable file. And they have maintained one single point of access and maybe a PowerShell script that will say a trigger, and then it'll execute all that malware at the same time. Why would someone do that? Don't they want to maintain access to be able to spy on everything? Nope, they just want to be able to take down at a specific time all the satellite capabilities or all the comms capabilities, that disrupt, deny, degrade, destroy capabilities that we've always theorized. We haven't seen it in practice too much, but we know at some point it is likely to happen. So most of our nation state adversary stuff is financial, steal stuff, watch for it. Yeah, that's much easier than this kind of capability that we're taking a look at here. All right, what about file wiping? Just going back to another example in here. When someone wipes a file, just as this is also kind of a whoa, I didn't realize that. When you wipe a file, most file wipers delete the file name in the NTFS entry, but they don't wipe the file name in the directory entry. And this is again where when I do forensics against nation state attackers, I'm always able to find the replicative file name in the directory entry. It's because it's recorded in 2 locations. So one of the ways that we do this, even your file wiping software that you end up having out there, is you'll wipe the NTFS entry, which overwrites it with all A's or whatever you potentially have that character set in there, all Z's. But then you'll look in the directory entry, which is the NTFS B+ tree, where you have all of that information that's sitting in there. And then depending on how that is loaded, you potentially see the original file name of that executable still sitting in the directory entry. And you'll still see it, including the timestamps, all still sitting in there. And that's another way that we've been able to pull some of this stuff out. So the only reason I mention this is that, when people say, well, I just wiped the file, no one could ever see the original name, no one's gonna be able to tell that the thing was there, is that there's so much information stored as soon as you touch the file system that you're gonna still be able to pull this information out. So the so what to a lot of this conversation that, I pull up from both experiences from my defensive side to my offensive side that I take a look at is you could only be as good as long as you could stay hidden and don't move. It is just like every other game you were taught when you were playing online gaming. Is you could sit on that perch with your, super scope rifle. As soon as you start picking people off, they're going to see the bullet whizzes by and they're going to be able to figure out where you're at. We all know how that works. It's you could sit there forever. No one's going to know where you're at. But as soon as you start moving and going into action, they could see you. The thing about offensive forensics is that when you get into this mindset, after you gain credential access, once you gain control of the network, the thing you have to then ask is, if I was really attacking this network, what would my true mission be if I was a nation state adversary? What would take it to the next level? So when you're potentially engaging in penetration testing and you're starting to think about threat emulation, and you're trying to tie this into your consulting gigs to be able to say, well, would you like a threat emulation on top of this? The threat emulation should start to mimic that next step, which is the goals of the adversary, which is it going to be, let me see if I could get malware dropped on a system, delay and wait, and how long can I get that malware to sit there without anyone noticing it so I could trigger it 3 months from now? Or is it could be to steal stuff? And how long can I remain in the network doing trickle searching for data? And you might even set it up saying, I need certain files within the network with this one keyword on it, and just drop them everywhere. I will do my best to find it. And then I will find as many of these files as I could get, and then I'm going to do trickle exfil of those files once I find them. And again, that would be a really good threat emulation of it. And a lot of people say, well, I want you to emulate the Koreans or the Iranians, or it's less that, it's more about thinking about what the techniques are, what they're going to potentially be looking for. Can your threat hunting teams detect what adversaries will actually do inside your network? That's the difference. It's not really, it's like, do the Iranians and the Russians and the Koreans really are doing that much different thing? No, their malware samples may be different. What they're after is really getting down into the weeds here of either probably stealing something, they're probably dropping malware, they're probably trying to disrupt something, probably trying to steal financial information. What is it that they're potentially after in the end? So after you gain this admin access, the real question is, how do you level yourself up? How good are you at remaining stealthy? And for those of you really interested in this kind of stuff, I highly recommend for a lot of offensive folks who think I'm really good at remaining at the tip of the spear on my penetration testing offensive skills. The best way you can do that is really get on the forensic side and take a look at how we detect you on the forensic side. Because the more you actually understand how we detect you, the easier it will be to evade those detections. Because in the back of your mind, you say, I know this will expose me. Maybe I shouldn't do that right now. There will be less of those oops moments of the wrench in the back hitting the steel on the submarine deck.